Yarn Spotlight today, yarn expert Clara Parkes is going to share with us bulk without loft. So what are the ways of achieving that? I always think of bulky yarns as being pretty heavy.
Well, there are two ways that you can do it, and one of them is you let the fiber give the bulk for you, and then but what you were saying about sometimes bulky yarn can be too heavy. What happens is if you take a fiber that's kind of dense on its own and you spin it really thickly or densely, it's going to be too heavy.
And what makes a fiber dense versus making it not dense?
A lot of that has to do with the natural curl pattern on the fiber.
Okay.
Here we're talking about protein fibers, wool, alpaca, things like that. The larger the curls, and it sort of works opposite to the way I would think about it, but the larger the curls, the more densely the fibers sit next to each other.
Okay.
The finer the crimps, like in merino, this is a 90 merino, 10% cashmere, the finer the crimps, the more is pushing each fiber away from each other, which gives you just a natural, innate sense of loft in the yarn.
That makes sense. There's more air packed in with the fibers.
Right.
Okay.
So what do you do with those fibers that tend to be dense? That's where mills get into the game, and they've come up with all sorts of different spins, new spins on bulky yarns that give it the illusion of loft and bulk without the density or the weight.
So you're putting air in during the spinning process.
Yes.
Interesting.
And yeah, so this guy here, one of the best ways to put air in during the spinning process is it's not even a traditionally spun yarn. What they do, in knitting terms, they essentially knit a I-cord, and that becomes your yarn, or it's a knitted tube yarn. That's exactly what this is.
And you can actually see here.
Yeah. What happens there is it's sort of like by knitting into an I-cord tube, you're creating crimp where there may not be crimp.
Oh, that makes sense.
Each stitch gives you that wonderful bounce, and because the tube is hollow in the center, you've got a lot of air, you've got a lot of loft into something that if you just took these fibers, compacted them, and twisted them, it might be denser.
And the fabric itself is really unusual looking. You can sort of start to see the...
Isn't it fun? It's almost, with the, you see like little spots, little holes from the knit stitches in the yarn. I like to think of it sort of like knitted coral, or almost like a cork appearance. It's a very round, it's a very stable structure for a yarn, extremely springy. I mean, you could really have some fun with it. The roundedness makes it spectacular for 3D stitches or high definition cables, ribbing, anything like that where you just want to sculpt patterning onto your fabric.
Yeah, these cables really have that beautiful like carved appearance and some interesting texture inside them from the structure of the yarn. Very interesting. And then what is this over here? A similar kind of construction?
Yeah, this is kind of a newer development. What they've done is they've created this knitted tube, sort of like this, but in a really, really fine fiber, and then during the spinning process, they actually shot alpaca fibers into that tube.
Oh.
And so there's no twist to kind of compact the fibers down. They're just shot into the tube.
Oh, interesting.
And it's the tube itself that holds it together.
Interesting. So you said that this was alpaca. What's the fiber blend on this one?
This one would be superwash wool. It's got mulberry silk in it. That's where the sheen is that you're seeing. And then it also has some nylon in it.
So what kind of projects would you say that knitted tube yarns are good for? I mean, the drape here is pretty phenomenal.
I would say knitted tube yarns, they're great if you want like a really gorgeous, a jacket, a sweater, a coat. I mean, you can obviously do hats and mittens and things like that. The only thing I wouldn't use for a yarn like this, and I think everybody would agree, would be something like socks.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, great. So finally a way to, or the right yarns for working your big bulky projects without adding a whole lot of bulk.
That's right.
Well, fabulous. Clara, thank you so much for all of the yarn wisdom and advice that you've imparted to us over the season.
My pleasure.